We're talking Memphis Tigers today on Sharpen the Point. 2024 record 11-2. It was a very quality season. They lived up to expectations of being able to be a G5 playoff contender. They just weren't quite able to get the job done with an experienced roster. Head coach Ryan Silverfield enters his sixth season. He's just been a constant winner. I think we see him continue this, and we're going to talk a lot about the turnover in this roster. Longtime starter Seth Hennigan departs the quarterback position. He was just a steady force for a number of years at that point. He had a great career and capped it off with a great season at 3,500 yards, 25 touchdowns last year. And the quarterback room's pretty thin right now. They only had 3 on the roster in the spring, but it's extremely talented. Brendan Lewis comes over from Nevada. He has the inside track to be the guy this year. He's got a ton of experience, having started 35 games between Nevada and Colorado. He's showed continuous improvement during that time. He's a true dual threat quarterback. Last season, Lewis accounted for 2,300 yards, 16 touchdowns passing, and then another 775 and 8 on the ground. I think we see him grow a little bit more. I don't think you can expect the passing numbers out of him that Hennigan put up, but I think you get more rushing on the, which is going to benefit them in the long run, specifically with what they've lost in the backfield. Behind him, A.J. Hill is possibly a future star. He's a 4-star recruit. He's extremely young. He came in at 17 years old, but he's got a pro frame already at 6'6", 225. I think he's going to get to 230, 240 by the time he's ready to leave the program, which hopefully is in quite a few years. He's been praised by the coaching staff consistently for his maturity by asking all the right questions. He's met with the offensive line coach to talk protections. He's met with the wide receivers coach to talk about routes and what should be happening. Those are all things that show his maturity and his football IQ at such a young age. And he's got good arm strength already. So he is somebody that I hope takes over next year and has a long run similar to Hennigan. If we have to see him this year, there's going to be some questions. He looked a little rough in the spring game. But there's going to be a lot of growth, and his trajectory is going to fly up potentially very quickly. Running back-wise, Mario Anderson departs. He had a monster year after coming in. He had nearly 1,700 total yards, 21 touchdowns, and it could have been a lot more touchdowns because thankfully for us fantasy players, Brandon Thomas is finally gone. The man was a thorn in our sides, vulturing touchdowns consistently, including 9 a year ago. That is, I'm just so happy to see him go. He was a great red zone back, but for fantasy purposes, highly annoying with all the points that Mario Anderson could have had Brandon Thomas not existed. Backfield's now going to fall on Sutton Smith, Greg DeRozier's, and Makari Bodiford. DeRozier's is my pick to take over, as last season he showed a ton of explosive capability via the ground and the air. That was most on display against a very good, very talented Tulane team where he had 6 for 41 and a touchdown on the ground, 8 for 84 and 2 in the air. He was consistently ripping off chunk plays throughout the season in the limited work he got. He earned more work during last season, and I expect him to get it right out the gate. I think he's a very, very good replacement for Mario Anderson. Pass catching wise, it's a full hockey line change here. The top 3 wide receivers, Rock Taylor, he had 66, 950, and 2 last year. He was a steady force. He just couldn't convert in the red zone to score touchdowns. Blankumsey was a very good, talented wide receiver who had a couple of good seasons under his belt. He's going to be missed as well. Kobe Drake, the 3rd wide receiver, also gone. And then you got to add in the tight end Anthony Lanphier departing. So it's a brand new cast of characters to work with a brand new quarterback. Louisville transfer Jaden Thompson and Purdue transfer C.J. Smith look to be the top 2 to me. Thompson needs to get healthy. He missed most of the spring injuries, and he's going to be a factor when he does, though. He's a quality player. He's going to be able to get open. He's a good replacement. Smith, also very good replacement. He impressed a lot in the spring game. He had over 100 yards and a touchdown. He's fast. He's elusive. He's going to be able to get over the top. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of connection they can make with the new quarterbacks. Brady Cluse, Keondae Henry, they're poised for bigger roles in their return to the offense, but they're going to play the back seat to the two transfers. Also transferring in Jerry Cross at tight end from Penn State. Penn State has a great lineage of tight ends that they've brought out. I think this kid can play. He left the spring game with an injury, but he should be the starter right out of the gate. The other two tight ends had quality highlight plays in the spring game themselves, so showing that they have a little bit of depth at the position. Offensive line-wise, that's where they lost their biggest guy in the spring portal. Xavier Hill being gone to Colorado, he was a two-time first-team All-AAC interior lineman. He was capable of moving around a little bit. That's a big departure, but it's a good offensive line overall. Chris Adams starting at left tackle. They got a FIU transfer, Travis Burke, who's likely to start at right tackle. Burke is a mountain of a man standing at 6'9". I love the size there. He's going to be a force in the run game for sure. Returning guard Malachi Breland had offseason surgery. Missed the spring, but I'm confident he'll be back and start in the fall. The center, Yakiri Walker, comes in from Colorado. He should start right away. That was a good Colorado offensive line last year. It was underrated. Most of the pieces left, but he's a good, decent player. On defense, they kept their biggest player, William Whitlow Jr., was massive to keep. He was an All-AAC first team, last season. He tested the transfer portal, ended up staying. It was a good guy to be able to build around along that defensive line. Mond Cole, Joshua White, and Reggie Grimes all returning. They're going to compete for spots along with the additions of Rayam Buell from Colorado and Puda Walker, all named team, Puda, from Kennesaw State. They have good depth there. I expect them to be pretty decent on the defensive line coming out. And they're going to need to be because the second level is hurting. They lost all three starting linebackers from a year ago. Chandler Martin was a just force in that linebacking core, just amassing 111 tackles, 7 sacks, an interception, 4 fumble recoveries, 1 went for a touchdown. And then the other 2 were no slouch either. They did manage to add a ton of experience in the winter portal, bringing in Everett Rousseau Jr. from UAB, Drew Watts out of Nevada. He comes along with Braden Lewis, Cam Burden from Charlotte, Sam Brunfield, Virginia Tech, DeMarco Ward for FSU. They all join the room. Some guys return. They're going to factor into the competition as well as with the Law brothers. They brought the Law brothers in the spring. It's going to be interesting to see who gets those starting spots. I think that is going to be a key to the success of this defense overall. One other tough area, losing both starting quarterbacks. Kobe Minor went to the NFL. Davion Ross graduated. Those are going to be question marks, but they did a very nice job in the portal here. They're going to replace him with Chauncey Logan, comes from James Madison. He was a starter, a very quality player. Benny Mwamba from Chattanooga. He's got some upside. And Amarion Cooper, highly rated, but from out of Florida State. I think you're going to see Logan be the top guy. He has played a lot of ball for James Madison with the move up. He started early on, and he's kind of locked into a spot for as far as I'm concerned, but I'm a homer with that. Nwamba and Cooper I think compete pretty heavily for that second role, and they're probably going to get targeted a lot more than Logan will be. Cortland Marsh returns at safety. I love that. And Chris Bracey from UAB and Kamari Wilson of Arizona State are going to compete for the other spot with a few returners, but those are more the expected guys. So we're going to see a lot of transfers coming in. It wasn't a great transfer year, but these are depth guys. They're able to make an impact, we'll say, and especially when they're dropping down level. P4 to G5. They're capable of competing here. Let's look at the schedule and the outlook for this season. After losing all 4 captains from last year's team, that is a big loss. They need to find voices to step up and lead the team. The turnover on the roster and in the leadership department is an issue for sure, because now they have to be able to come together without that leadership being in the room. But it's a well-coached team. These are guys that are established in this program. They've established a culture, and they were able to reload. This is a team we expect to be a contender for that G5 playoff spot year in and year out. They did a very nice job of reloading a roster that lost a lot, mainly to graduation, which can't be said for a lot of G5 teams. So expecting last year's results is a bit too much given the returning leadership on both sides of the ball. But schedule-wise, it's not too bad. Chattanooga, you're going to get an easy win out of that. Georgia State should win that game. At Troy, it should be a little test, but they lost some stuff, so I expect they win that. Arkansas is going to be the game where if you come into that 3-0 and you make a run at them, they're going to be a quality roster, specifically with what they return. But if you win that game, you're in the driver's seat for that G5 spot. That's a huge marker game to put on the resume. At FAU, that's an expected loss with Arkansas. Like, you would expect to lose that game, but at FAU, you're going to win. FAU is going to be more dangerous than they were a year ago for sure, but they're going to take some time for that system to fully implement with the players that were brought in. Tulsa, that should be a win. They have a quality run game, but more than that, I don't see them reverting too much off of what they were a year ago. UAB is going to be interesting at UAB. Dilfer's building a good offense. That defense has just struggled. So I think it's a game where they're going to be pushed a little bit, but they pull a win out there. South Florida is going to be improved, I think. It just depends on how healthy Byron Brown can be. The man is a flat-out difference maker. He's probably the best quarterback in the conference, I would say now. And it's going to be an interesting game. That's a tough one. I want to see that game and see how it plays out and see how this team is building up to it. Being a little later in the season, I like that. It could be interesting. At Rice, that's a win. Tulane is usually the toughest test on the schedule. They're an extremely well-coached team. I just think they need a quarterback. They're really struggling right at the moment with the quarterback position. They're still looking for one. We know they're as good as anybody from a coaching aspect, and it's probably going to end up being a lower scoring game. But with their losses, I would expect to be able to take a win here. But you're playing a 17-14, 21-17 game here. At East Carolina, they're a potentially dangerous team on offense specifically, but you got to lean into a win there. And Navy finishing out with them, that's the toughest opponent. They bring a ton back. They return a lot on offense. They're a very good, well-coached, disciplined team. And late in the season, it's not fun having to play that triple option. They're the stiffest competition for the conference championship, given how much they do return. So that's maybe a conference championship preview similar to what we saw last year, where Tulane played late in the season with some teams that were destined to be able to make runs, we'll say, at the conference title game. Expectation should be 8 wins and to be in contention for a conference title game appearance again, with the opportunity that if everything clicks and you get through Arkansas, you can make a run at that G5 playoff spot, because I think the level of the teams competing for that G5 playoff spot is not quite the same as it was a year ago. I've been thinking a lot about who could be the G5 contenders, and this is a team that's on the short list for sure.